The crystal glass slipped from her fingers as her sister whispered, "Nobody wants you." Seo-yeon caught it inches above the marble floor, the sharp clink swallowed by the orchestra before anyone could see her hands shaking. Above her, chandeliers scattered warm gold across the ballroom, catching on diamonds, champagne flutes, and the polished black shoes of Seoul's most powerful families. Soo-jin smiled as if nothing had happened. "Look at you," she said softly, loud enough for the people nearest them to hear. "You come to a room like this and still think someone is going to choose you?" A few guests exchanged amused glances. Someone laughed behind a champagne glass. Seo-yeon lowered the glass onto a passing silver tray, her fingertips brushing the cold metal. She could smell roses from the centerpieces and the faint smoke of expensive candles burning along the walls. "I didn't come here to be chosen," she answered. Soo-jin's smile tightened. "Then why are you still standing here?" The question landed harder than the insult. Seo-yeon looked toward the ballroom entrance, where velvet curtains framed the city lights beyond the tall windows. She could leave. She should leave. But leaving now would give Soo-jin exactly what she wanted. So she straightened the simple black dress she had spent weeks saving for, smoothed one crease near her waist, and remained where she was. Across the ballroom, conversation gradually faded around one particular table. Kang Min-jae had stopped listening. He sat beneath the amber chandelier light in a perfectly tailored black suit, one hand resting beside an untouched glass of whiskey. The room knew his name. People lowered their voices when he entered. Servers moved more carefully near him. Even men twice his age measured their words around him. But Min-jae was not watching the men negotiating beside him. His dark eyes had settled on Seo-yeon. He had seen the insult. He had seen her catch the glass. More importantly, he had seen what she did afterward. She did not cry. She did not plead. She did not turn to the room and ask anyone to defend her. She simply placed the glass down and stood straighter. Soo-jin noticed Min-jae looking in their direction and immediately changed her expression. "Oh," she murmured, following Seo-yeon's gaze. "Don't tell me you were hoping he noticed you." Seo-yeon said nothing. Soo-jin leaned closer, the perfume on her skin mixing with the scent of champagne. "Men like Kang Min-jae don't notice women like you." Seo-yeon finally looked at her. "Then there's nothing for me to worry about." Soo-jin laughed. "Exactly." She turned away, satisfied, and reached for another glass. But across the room, Min-jae slowly set down his whiskey. The movement was small, almost invisible, yet the two men beside him stopped talking. Min-jae rose from his chair. The orchestra continued playing, violins gliding beneath the chandelier glow as polished shoes shifted across the marble floor. One step, then another. Heads began to turn. Seo-yeon heard the whispers before she understood what was happening. Kang Min-jae was walking toward them, not toward Soo-jin, not toward the family table, straight toward her. And with every measured step across the ballroom, the woman who had just said nobody wanted Seo-yeon began to lose the smile on her face. Min-jae stopped 3 steps from Seo-yeon, and the ballroom seemed to hold its breath around them. The polished marble beneath his shoes reflected the chandelier light in long golden streaks, while the faint clatter of silverware from the banquet tables suddenly sounded far too loud. Seo-yeon kept her hands folded in front of her, fingertips pressed against the cool fabric of her dress. "Mr. Kang," she said quietly. "You don't need to." "I know," he replied. His voice was low enough that only those nearest could hear it. He glanced once at the untouched champagne beside her, then at Soo-jin. "You were leaving?" Soo-jin answered before Seo-yeon could. She was. Min-jae's gaze returned to Seo-yeon. "Do you want to leave?" The question caught her off guard. Nobody had asked what she wanted all evening. She looked toward the ballroom doors, where warm air from the crowded hall met the cooler draft slipping beneath the entrance. "Yes," she said. Min-jae nodded once. "Then you will." Soo-jin's expression changed. "Excuse me?" Min-jae turned toward her, calm and perfectly still. "You heard her." Soo-jin gave a small laugh, trying to recover beneath the watching eyes. "This is a family matter." "Then handle it without humiliating her in public." The orchestra continued, but the music now seemed distant. A server carrying a silver tray slowed near the edge of the group. Soo-jin's fingers tightened around her champagne glass. You barely know her. That's true. Min-jae looked at Seo-yeon again. But I know what I saw. Seo-yeon lowered her eyes. She had spent years learning how to disappear inside rooms like this, how to make herself smaller whenever Soo-jin raised her voice. Yet now the most powerful man in the ballroom was refusing to let her vanish. Min-jae extended his hand, not touching her, simply offering the choice. Come with me. Seo-yeon stared at his hand. The cuff of his black suit was immaculate, a silver watch catching the chandelier light at his wrist. Around them, whispers spread like ripples through water. She could hear Soo-jin breathing sharply behind her. Why? Seo-yeon asked. Min-jae answered without hesitation. Because you said you wanted to leave. That was all. No grand promise. No performance for the crowd. Seo-yeon slowly stepped forward. Her heels clicked against the marble, one measured sound after another. When she passed Soo-jin, her sister reached for her arm. Min-jae moved between them before Soo-jin could make contact. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Don't. Soo-jin froze. Seo-yeon looked at Min-jae, then at the ballroom doors. For the first time that evening, she walked toward them without lowering her head. Min-jae walked beside her, matching her pace instead of pulling her along. Behind them, the orchestra played on, but nobody at the nearest tables was listening anymore. At the entrance, Seo-yeon stopped. She turned back once. Soo-jin stood beneath the chandelier, surrounded by people who had watched her humiliation begin. Now every one of them was watching Seo-yeon leave beside Kang Min-jae. Min-jae opened the door and waited. Tomorrow, he said, you can decide whether you want to return. Seo-yeon looked at him. Return. His eyes remained fixed on hers. With me. Then he stepped aside, leaving the choice entirely in her hands. Seo-yeon stood beneath the hotel's carved stone entrance, one hand resting against the cool brass handle while the distant music drifted through the closing doors behind her. The night air outside was several degrees colder than the ballroom, carrying the clean scent of rain on pavement and the faint perfume of white roses from the hotel's entrance arrangements. Min-jae waited beside the black sedan, his driver holding the rear door open, but he did not tell her what to do. You said I could decide tomorrow, Seo-yeon said. Min-jae glanced at her. I did. She looked back through the glass doors. Beyond them, warm chandelier light spilled across the marble floor, illuminating the silhouettes of guests who were still watching. Then I'm going back. The driver's hand paused on the door. Min-jae said nothing for a moment. Seo-yeon turned toward him. Not because of my sister. Not because of anyone in that room. I just don't want her deciding when I'm allowed to stand somewhere. Something shifted in Min-jae's expression, so slight that she almost missed it. Then we go back. They entered together. The ballroom doors opened with a soft mechanical hush, and the warmth of the room rolled over Seo-yeon's skin. Crystal glasses chimed. Silk dresses whispered across the polished floor. Conversations broke apart as people noticed Kang Min-jae returning with the woman he had personally escorted out. Seo-yeon walked beside him, but this time she did not hide behind his presence. She stopped several feet from Soo-jin. I'm not leaving because you told me to, she said. Soo-jin set down her champagne glass. The stem clicked against the marble-topped table. You came back? Yes. After making everyone stare? Soo-jin's voice sharpened. You have no idea what people are saying about you. Seo-yeon looked around the room. No one spoke loudly now. Some guests pretended to examine their drinks. Others watched openly. They were already talking before I came back. Soo-jin stepped closer. Do you really think standing beside him changes who you are? Seo-yeon's eyes moved briefly toward Min-jae. He remained several feet away, silent, giving her the space to answer for herself.
No, she said.
It changes nothing about me. She faced Soo-jin again. That's why I came back. Soo-jin's smile disappeared. She reached for the small black clutch resting beside her chair and snapped it shut.
Fine.
Stay. Her voice dropped. But don't expect me to pretend you belong here. Seo-yeon did not move. I never asked you to. For the first time, Soo-jin had no immediate answer. The orchestra continued playing, a slow piano melody threading beneath the soft hum of the ballroom. Min-jae finally stepped forward, stopping beside Seo-yeon. He looked at the empty chair near the main table, then at her. There is a seat beside me. Soo-jin's head turned sharply. Seo-yeon stared at the chair. It was positioned at the center of the most important table in the room, where only family heads, senior executives, and honored guests were seated. Min-jae pulled it back himself. The legs made a quiet scrape against the marble floor.
You can sit there, he said.
Every conversation around them stopped. Seo-yeon looked at the chair, then at the woman who had told her nobody wanted her. Slowly, she walked toward it. And when she sat beside Kang Min-jae, the balance of the entire ballroom changed. The chair beside Kang Min-jae had barely stopped scraping against the marble when Seo-yeon sat down, the velvet cushion cool beneath her palms and the chandelier light breaking into tiny reflections across the polished tableware. She could hear the muted clink of forks, the soft rustle of silk, and somewhere behind her, Soo-jin setting her champagne glass down harder than necessary. Min-jae did not speak immediately. He simply reached for the water carafe and poured a glass for Seo-yeon. Clear water struck crystal with a quiet, steady sound. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." Around them, the dinner resumed in fragments, but nobody seemed willing to look directly at the two of them for long. Seo-yeon lifted the glass, the cold rim touching her lips, then set it down untouched. "You didn't have to do that." Min-jae looked at her. "Do what?" "Walk across the ballroom. Bring me back.
Give
me this seat." His gaze moved briefly across the room before returning to her. "You are being treated as though you had no right to stand there." "I'm used to it." The words left her quietly. Min-jae's fingers stopped beside his glass. "That doesn't make it acceptable." Seo-yeon looked down at the white tablecloth, tracing one embroidered edge with her thumb. Before she could answer, Soo-jin approached. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble, each step carrying through the sudden quiet around their table. She stopped beside Seo-yeon's chair. "May I speak with my sister?" Min-jae leaned back slightly. "She can answer for herself." Soo-jin's jaw tightened. "Seo-yeon." Seo-yeon looked up. "What do you want?" "5 minutes. Privately." Seo-yeon glanced toward Min-jae. He did not interfere. That choice mattered more than if he had ordered her to stay.
She stood. "Phoenix."
Soo-jin led her toward a quieter corridor outside the ballroom, where the carpet softened their footsteps and warm wall sconces cast narrow pools of amber light across dark wood paneling. The doors closed behind them, muting the orchestra to a distant vibration. Soo-jin turned immediately. "What are you doing?" Seo-yeon folded her hands. "Standing." "Don't play innocent." Soo-jin stepped closer. "Do you understand what you just did? You let Kang Min-jae make a spectacle of you. He didn't make me do anything. You think he actually cares about you?" Soo-jin laughed once, but there was no warmth in it. "Men like him don't cross a ballroom for women like us." Seo-yeon held her gaze. "Then why did he?" Soo-jin opened her mouth, but no answer came. The question stayed between them. Then Seo-yeon walked past her, opened the corridor door, and returned to the ballroom on her own. Min-jae was still seated where she had left him. He looked up as she approached. Seo-yeon stopped beside the chair.
"I'm staying."
Min-jae nodded once.
"Good."
She sat again. This time, he did not need to invite her. Across the room, Soo-jin remained in the corridor doorway, watching them. Then Min-jae moved his place card from his right side and set it directly beside Seo-yeon's. It was a small gesture, almost formal.
But
everyone at the table understood what it meant. Her place was no longer temporary. Min-jae's place card sat beside Seo-yeon's, the black lettering catching the chandelier light while the orchestra played softly behind them. Seo-yeon rested her fingertips against the thick ivory paper, then looked at him. "You just changed the seating plan." "Yes." "Because of me?" "Because of what happened." His answer was calm, but before she could respond, a senior guest approached their table and bowed slightly to Min-jae. "Mr. Kang, your host is asking for you." Min-jae glanced toward the center of the ballroom, then back at Seo-yeon. "Wait here." Seo-yeon shook her head. I don't need guarding. His eyes held hers for a second. I know. He stood and walked away. For the first time since entering the ballroom, Seo-yeon was alone. The warmth of the room pressed against her skin, carrying the scent of roses, polished wood, and champagne. Across the table, Soo-jin watched her with a tight smile. She approached slowly, stopping beside Seo-yeon's chair. You really believe this means something? Seo-yeon folded her napkin. I believe he invited me to sit here. He invited you because he felt sorry for you. Soo-jin leaned closer. Men like Min-jae don't choose women like you. They protect people when it benefits them. Seo-yeon placed the napkin beside her plate. Then let him decide why. Soo-jin's expression hardened. You've always been good at pretending you belong somewhere. She reached towards Seo-yeon's place card and lifted it from the table. The thick paper bent slightly between her fingers. Maybe I should save you from embarrassing yourself. Seo-yeon stood. Put it back. Soo-jin smiled. Or what? Seo-yeon reached across the table and took the card from her hand. The movement was quiet, but firm. Or I'll put it back myself. She placed it beside her plate and sat down again. Soo-jin stared at her, then turned toward the ballroom as Min-jae returned. His footsteps were measured against the marble, and the silver watch at his wrist flashed beneath the amber lights. He stopped beside the table. Is there a problem? Soo-jin answered quickly. No, Min-jae looked at Seo-yeon. Is that true? Seo-yeon met his eyes. She wanted to remove my place card. Silence settled over the table. Min-jae slowly turned towards Soo-jin. Why? Soo-jin opened her mouth, but no answer came. Min-jae reached for the place card, straightened its edge, and set it precisely beside Seo-yeon's plate. It stays. Soo-jin's face tightened. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. No, Min-jae said. You are. He pulled out the chair beside Seo-yeon and sat down. Then he addressed the nearest server. From now on, anything Seo-yeon requests comes through me. The server immediately bowed. Soo-jin looked between them. You're really doing this? Min-jae's gaze remained steady. Yes. Seo-yeon turned toward him, caught off guard by the certainty in his voice. He lowered his voice, so only she could hear. You came back because you refused to let someone else decide where you belonged. His eyes moved toward the ballroom. So tonight, nobody moves your seat. For the first time, Soo-jin stepped backward instead of forward. And when Min-jae placed his hand beside Seo-yeon's on the table, not touching her, but close enough to make his choice unmistakable, the whispers around the ballroom changed completely. Min-jae's hand remained beside Seo-yeon's on the white linen, close enough to signal his choice without claiming hers. The orchestra softened into a slow waltz, while warm candlelight trembled across crystal glasses and the polished surface of the table. Soo-jin stared at them for several seconds before stepping forward again. You're making a mistake, she said. Min-jae lifted his eyes. Then explain it. Soo-jin hesitated. She doesn't belong in your world. Seo-yeon's fingers tightened around the edge of her napkin, but Min-jae answered first. Neither do most people who sit at this table. A few guests lowered their eyes. Soo-jin looked towards Seo-yeon. Tell him. Tell him what? Tell him you don't want this. Seo-yeon looked at Min-jae. He did not speak for her. He simply waited. That silence gave her more room than any defense could have. I didn't ask him to choose me, she said. I asked him to stop you from deciding where I could. Stunt. Soo-jin's cheeks flushed. And now you're sitting beside him like you've won something. Seo-yeon slowly placed her napkin on the table. I'm sitting here because he offered me a choice. Min-jae's gaze remained on Soo-jin. And she made it. Soo-jin stepped closer. What exactly do you want from her? Min-jae leaned back, the leather of his chair making a faint sound beneath the music. Nothing. Soo-jin blinked. Nothing. Not tonight. His answer silenced her. Seo-yeon turned toward him. Then why are you doing all this? Min-jae looked at her instead of Soo-jin. Because when you were humiliated, you still chose to walk back into the room. His voice stayed quiet. Most people would have run. Seo-yeon looked down at the table, where the candle flame reflected in the silverware. Maybe I was tired of running. Min-jae gave the smallest nod. Then he stood. The room gradually followed his movement with dozens of silent glances. He extended his hand towards Seo-yeon. Come with me. She looked at his hand. Where? Somewhere you can breathe. He waited. No pressure. No command. Seo-yeon placed her hand in his. His palm was warm against her cool fingers. Together they left the table, passing beneath the chandeliers as the orchestra continued behind them. They stopped near the tall windows overlooking the city, where the glass was cold beneath Seo-yeon's fingertips and the distant glow of Seoul shimmered below. Min-jae released her hand immediately.
You can go home, he said.
Or you can stay. Either way, I won't let anyone force you. Seo-yeon studied him. You keep saying that, because you keep expecting me to make the decision for you. She almost smiled. Maybe I'm not used to anyone asking. Min-jae looked toward the ballroom. Then get used to it. Behind them, Soo-jin appeared at the far end of the room. She stopped when she saw them standing together by the windows. Min-jae turned back to Seo-yeon. I want you to come to another dinner with me tomorrow. Seo-yeon's eyes widened slightly. Why? Because tonight, I crossed the ballroom for you. His voice lowered. Tomorrow, I want to know whether you'll walk toward me on your own.
Seo-yeon
Looked at the ballroom, then back at him. She gave one quiet nod. I will. Min-jae's expression softened by a fraction. Then Soo-jin's voice cut across the room. Seo-yeon. She turned. Her sister stood beneath the chandelier, waiting for an answer. Seo-yeon released a slow breath, stepped away from the window, and walked back into the ballroom beside Min-jae. This time, she was not being rescued. She was choosing where to stand. The ballroom doors closed behind Seo-yeon, muting the orchestra into a distant rhythm as she returned beside Min-jae, the warm chandelier light spilling across the marble floor. Soo-jin waited near the table, her champagne glass untouched, one hand gripping the stem so tightly that her knuckles had turned pale. You really agreed to dinner tomorrow? She asked. Seo-yeon stopped. Yes. With him? Yes. Soo-jin gave a short laugh. You don't even know what kind of man he is. Min-jae remained beside Seo-yeon, his expression unreadable beneath the golden light. She knows enough to make her own choice. Soo-jin looked at him. And what exactly does she know? That I asked her. That's not an answer. Min-jae's eyes narrowed slightly. It is the only answer you need. Seo-yeon stepped forward before the exchange could become another spectacle. Soo-jin, stop. Her sister turned toward her. Stop what? Trying to decide what I'm allowed to do. The words came quietly, but they carried across the table. Seo-yeon reached for the black clutch she had left beside her chair and closed it with a soft click. You said I didn't belong here. You were wrong. Soo-jin stared at her. You think sitting beside him makes you important? No, Seo-yeon picked up her coat from the back of the chair. It reminds me that I don't need your permission. She slipped one arm into the sleeve, the wool brushing softly against her wrist. Min-jae watched without interrupting. When she finished, he stepped toward the ballroom entrance and opened the door for her. Outside, the hotel corridor was cooler, lined with dark wood and brass sconces that cast narrow pools of light onto the carpet. Seo-yeon walked beside him, her heels making a steady rhythm.
You didn't have to defend me again, she said.
I know. Then why did you? Min-jae stopped near the elevator. The polished brass doors reflected both of them in muted gold. Because you were defending yourself. The elevator bell sounded. The doors opened. Neither moved immediately. Seo-yeon looked at him. You said tomorrow you wanted me to walk toward you on my own. I did. She stepped into the elevator. Then I suppose I should keep my promise. Min-jae entered after her. The doors closed, leaving the ballroom behind. Inside, cool steel and soft amber lighting replaced the noise of the party. Seo-yeon folded her hands around the strap of her clutch. What happens tomorrow? Dinner. That's all. For now. She glanced at him. You're very difficult to read. So are you. A faint smile touched her mouth before disappearing. The elevator descended silently. Then Min-jae's phone vibrated. He checked the screen, his expression changing just enough for Seo-yeon to notice. Something wrong? He slipped the phone back into his pocket. No, the elevator doors opened to the hotel lobby. Cold marble, bright recessed lights, and the scent of polished leather filled the space. His driver waited near the entrance. Min-jae turned toward Seo-yeon. Tomorrow, 8 o'clock. She nodded. I'll be there. He paused. Seo-yeon. She looked back. If anyone tells you that you have to earn the right to sit beside me, don't listen. The lobby seemed unusually quiet. You already chose your seat. Then he walked toward the waiting car, leaving her beneath the hotel lights with one thought she could not dismiss. Tomorrow, for the first time, she would be the one crossing the distance toward him. At 8 o'clock the next evening, Seo-yeon walked through the hotel entrance alone, the heels of her shoes tapping against pale marble while warm recessed lights reflected across the glass doors. She wore the same simple black dress from the night before, but this time her shoulders were straight and her pace did not falter. A hostess greeted her and immediately led her toward the private dining room, where soft piano music drifted beneath the low hum of conversation and the scent of roasted garlic and fresh rosemary filled the air. Min-jae was already waiting beside the window. He stood when she entered. You came. Seo-yeon smiled faintly. I said I would. He pulled out her chair, then returned to his own seat. Beyond the glass, Seoul glittered beneath the dark sky, hundreds of windows shining like scattered stars. The table between them was small, set with white linen, crystal water glasses, and 2 untouched menus. You chose this place? She asked. Yes. Why? Because there are no cameras. She looked at him. You expected me to be uncomfortable. I expected you to be watched. Seo-yeon glanced toward the closed doors. You were right. A waiter entered, served 2 plates, and left quietly. Steam rose from the food, carrying the scent of butter and herbs. For several minutes, neither spoke. Then Seo-yeon placed her fork down. Can I ask you something? Anything. Why me? Min-jae did not answer immediately. He lifted his water glass, took a slow drink, and set it down. Because when everyone in that ballroom looked at you, you still stood there. Seo-yeon lowered her eyes. I almost didn't. But you did. She looked back at him. And you crossed the room. Yes. You could have ignored it. I could have. His voice remained steady. But I didn't want to. Before she could respond, the dining room doors opened. Soo-jin entered. Seo-yeon's fork stopped halfway to her plate. Min-jae turned toward the doorway, his expression immediately hardening. Soo-jin held a small cream envelope in one hand. I'm sorry to interrupt. Min-jae stood. You weren't invited. I know. She walked to the table and placed the envelope beside Seo-yeon's plate. This is for you. Seo-yeon looked at it but did not touch it. What is it? Something you should have received a long time ago. Min-jae stepped closer to the table. Leave. Soo-jin looked at him. This concerns her. Then speak to her. Soo-jin turned toward Seo-yeon. You think he crossed that ballroom because you were special. Maybe he did. But you should know something before you let yourself believe this is real. Seo-yeon finally reached for the envelope. The paper was thick beneath her fingertips. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph. Her eyes moved across it, then stopped. Min-jae watched her face change. What is it? He asked. Seo-yeon slowly placed the photograph on the table. It showed her standing outside a hospital years earlier, holding an umbrella over an elderly man she barely remembered. Min-jae stared at the image. The color drained from his expression. He looked at Seo-yeon. Where did you get this? She asked. Soo-jin stepped back toward the door. Now you know why he noticed you. Seo-yeon rose sharply, the chair legs scraping against the floor. Soo-jin. Her sister stopped. Tell me what this means. Soo-jin said nothing. She simply walked out, leaving the door swinging softly behind her. Min-jae picked up the photograph, his fingers tightening around its edge. Then he looked at Seo-yeon and spoke for the first time without his usual certainty. There's something I should have told you. The next evening, Seo-yeon returned to the same ballroom before dinner, the chandelier light spilling over the polished marble and the orchestra warming up somewhere beyond the tall doors. She had come because Min-jae had asked her to walk toward him, and she had decided she would. But before she reached the center of the room, Seo-yeon stepped into her path. "You should leave," she said. "Not this time." Seo-yeon kept walking. Seo-yeon caught her attention with a sharp laugh. "Do you really think he crossed the ballroom because he loves you?" Seo-yeon stopped. "He never said he loved me." "Then what did he say?" Seo-yeon's voice carried beneath the music. "That he chose you?" Seo-yeon looked toward the far end of the ballroom. Min-jae stood there in a black suit, watching them. "He chose to respect me," she said. Seo-yeon's smile faded. "You don't understand what you're getting into." "Then tell me." Seo-yeon hesitated. Seo-yeon took one step closer. "You've spent my whole life telling me I wasn't enough. Tonight, tell me the truth instead." The room grew quieter around them. Seo-yeon looked at Min-jae, then back at Seo-yeon.
Fine.
"He knows about the man you helped years ago." Seo-yeon's brow tightened. "The man outside the hospital?" Seo-yeon nodded. "That man was important to his family." Min-jae began walking toward them. The sound of his shoes against the marble seemed louder with every step. "Seo-yeon," he said. She turned. "You've said enough. She deserves to know." "She does." Min-jae stopped beside Seo-yeon. Then, instead of speaking for her, he looked directly at her. "The man in that photograph was my father." Seo-yeon's breath caught. "Your father?" He nodded. "Years ago, he collapsed outside a hospital. You were there. You gave him your umbrella, stayed with him, and refused to leave until help arrived." Seo-yeon searched his face. "I didn't know who he was." "I know."
His voice softened.
"That's why it mattered." Seo-yeon folded her arms. "And now you understand. He didn't cross that ballroom randomly." Min-jae turned toward her.
No.
"I crossed it because I saw someone being treated without dignity, and I remembered the kind of person my father once described." Seo-yeon went silent. Seo-yeon looked at him. "He remembered me?" "He remembered a young woman who stayed when everyone else walked away." Min-jae reached into his jacket and placed the photograph gently on the nearest table. "I didn't recognize you until tonight. But once I did, I knew I couldn't stand there and watch them humiliate you." Seo-yeon looked toward the center of the ballroom. The same floor where her sister had told her nobody wanted her now seemed strangely bright beneath the chandeliers. Min-jae extended his hand. "You came back." Seo-yeon looked at it, then placed her hand in his. "I told you I would." Together they walked into the center of the ballroom. Conversation stopped. Seo-yeon remained behind them, unable to follow. Min-jae turned toward Seo-yeon. "Not the crowd. You once crossed a hospital entrance for a stranger. Tonight, I crossed this ballroom for you." Seo-yeon's eyes held his. "Then I suppose we're even." A quiet smile appeared on his face. He offered his arm. She took it. Around them, the orchestra began to play, and the room that had once watched her humiliation now watched her stand beside the man who had chosen to see her. Seo-yeon looked once towards Seo-yeon, then forward. Again, she no longer needed anyone's permission to belong. And when Kang Min-jae led her across the ballroom, he did not walk ahead of her or behind her. He walked beside her, exactly where she had always deserved to be.